Welcome back to Mystical Sisterhood. I'm your host, Maureen Spielman. And as you get to know me, you know that I'm all about healing and joy and community. And a big part of my journey when I went through my health journey was turning towards what I consider complementary thoughts, ideas, alternative, however you want to name it. And that was a big part of my healing. And so a lot of my guests fall under this column. And I always say too, like I love to interview intuitives, healers, and other courageous women. So my guest today, Lisa Hagenbuch, is all of the above. And I'm so happy to have her today. We're going to be talking about astrology. And as you get to know me during this podcast too, I'm going to be asking a lot of questions about Astrology 101. But that being said, I want to welcome Lisa into the space. She's been a professional astrologer since 1998. She's also trained in family constellation work, which I hope that we get to even just a little bit today.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've had so many certifications, Lisa, but also trained in the work of Dr. Shefali. And so I think that that's such an interesting overlap that we have. And when I was thinking about the tie-in to the work you do, it makes perfect sense because I have a feeling a lot of your work is around family lineages and ancestral work. And so I'm just going to welcome you into this space. And, you know, if you want to begin wherever you want to begin, but possibly with how the heck did you get into this work and when did you know it was your call?
Yes. And first of all, thank you for this wonderful opportunity. I'm so excited to have a sacred conversation with you and just so wonderful to have met you through our mystical sisterhood with Valerie Wood.
Yeah, I love it.
So yeah. And, you know, just my background, I'm from Michigan, a very small town. Growing up, I had no hobbies. I didn't really know myself. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had a successful sales career and that was great. But then one day through a friend, she said, you have to come to my astrologer. She's the most amazing woman. And I'd always been interested in astrology. And I thought, okay, well, this sounds interesting. And I sat down in front of her. I went into her weird little office and I went and left blown away and knew from that moment that was what I wanted to be when I grew up.
Wow.
Even though I was, well into my late 20s by that point. It hit me. I knew that it was what I wanted to do. And I just dove into, I call it a rabbit hole because it's the most complex subject that I've ever come across. I'll never get bored because there's so many things to know just within the system of astrology that I do. And then there are other forms of astrology, and it's opened my world to so many other intuitive modalities too, that it's really been such the biggest part of my spiritual journey. And so I'm so fortunate to have found it. But I think we do find these things when we're meant to, so I was just very fortunate to have said yes and leaned into it.
Wow. You were quite young when you found it. That's amazing. And I love that story because it sounds like you were just going about life and someone invited you to something. And I think that's really special because sometimes that invitation is just there waiting for us. And the universe orchestrates the invitation. And then you have that choice. Do I say yes, or is it a no for me? And on that day, it was a portal into just something so big and new for you.
Yeah, it was. It's unfolded in so many wonderful ways that it's like a little spider web that keeps branching out, and it was to me it's the most insightful tool to understand who you are, because through the birth chart, which is based on the exact moment of your birth and time and space, everyone and everything and all your relationships, not only to people, but to the different areas of your life, are contained in the birth chart. Your relationship to work, to health, to your children, just everyone and everything. And so it to me, it holds up a mirror to you to investigate, to understand yourself better, and know what your strengths are, know what your challenges are. It's a great tool to shift what isn't working in your life. And having found that first, I'm so glad I found it before I became a parent because it's given me so much compassion for other people, because you
Okay.
see how different everyone is, and they're all have their own blueprint that they came in with, and it doesn't have to be just like yours. And
Yes, that's such a good point, and it's such a good place to start, because that's what I was going to say when you first, started talking about how it came into your life, and then you said it's complex. It is. And I love hearing that from you, because that's how I've found it to be at the outset. And so this conversation today is absolutely for our listeners, and it's so much for me too, because I'm like so interested in learning, like, what is this? So I think you just started to describe, well, at that time of your birth, the place of your birth. Can you say more about that? Like
yes.
what intervenes on those planes, or how to think about that just as a starting place?
Yeah, and so I do tropical astrology, and so the birth moment to me, it's the time when the cord is cut, and so like when the child is breathing on their own. And
Wow.
so your birth chart is based on your date of birth, your city of birth, and your exact moment of birth. So it's as if within the zodiac that we use, it's like somebody took a picture of where the planets were going through the specific constellations at that moment and froze it on a sheet of paper. And so it never changes your whole life, but then it's in constant communication with where the energies are moving, and they all move at different speeds.
Okay.
So they kick off different areas of your life. So most people know that their sun sign, but you also have a moon sign, you have a personality sign. There's a way that the planet of communication is described in your chart, the planet of love, Venus. So so think about it this way: is the planets represent the urges that we have to do things. Like the moon is our urge to nurture and support. Mercury is our urge to communicate. And then whatever constellation they were going through, it's like they're adjectives to describe how you do that. How do you do nurturing?
Okay.
If my moon is in Aries, so I nurture from the standpoint of like through the lens of I want to be the one nurturing.
Mm-hmm.
And and I relate it through, through the lens of this relationship, but it's always kind of through the lens of how it relates to me, but then how I nurture others. So
Okay.
in astrology, there's also the polarities we bring in. So but I respond, it's also your emotional nature. So I respond the quickest.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a moon in Pisces, you're going to want to merge with everything, and you might be highly intuitive, highly creative. So it's that adjective that kind of describes the planet urge
Okay.
to do something. And then the houses are the life areas. So there's a house for work, there's a house for career, and purpose. There's a house for health. There's a house for your money. There's a communication house. So the beauty of coming to somebody like me who's an astrologer is we take all of these energies in how they're interacting with each other at the time, and we try to put that into English for the person who's just learning about it. So you can learn about your personality traits, and then you can also, I give significant dates and timeframes for the near future, just of the energies that you're going to be encountering. But I like to think of these as it's a two-way street. So I believe that they inform and they compel us, but it's not like everything is fated in a certain way.
Okay. Yeah, because it made me think of the question. Thanks for laying that all out in that form. And so it seems like it would be a lot when people first receive the information, a lot of ahas, like, oh, it makes sense. Like I totally, do you get both reactions? Do you get most reactions of like, oh my gosh, that makes perfect sense? And oh, this one I'm not so sure about.
I do. I get both of those because at the time, the astrologer that has had the most influence in my life, and she wasn't teaching at the time, so she told me to go I found a course, a continuing ed, and this woman was very much into. I learned consciousness studies along with astrological studies. So I do get both. And I think that's based on how the consciousness of the individual is using. Okay. And the more conscious someone is, they're going to, so there's a lot of like what we call astrological cookbooks out there where they just talk about, Mercury in Aquarius means this, but it can unfold in a number of different ways. And the more you're co-creating with the energies for yourself, that you might express it in a different way. So sometimes I do get, that makes a lot of sense. And sometimes I get, well, I use it this way. So to me, it's so fascinating to see how people are using the energies.
I love that. And such a good explanation. I love how you pointed out in the beginning too, that it made you have an appreciation for the unique blueprint for a long time now, because I think that's a concept that came to me more through conscious parenting and learning about that. And so that's a neat, I think, dovetail into the conscious parenting, not out yet, but just about the premise of that is that unique blueprint of the individual. So can there ever be, one of the questions, I have so many questions, but one of the questions is, can there ever be someone that cut that cord at the exact same time? Or is that, yes. Okay.
Yes, exactly. And I have twin brothers. So they essentially have the same chart. They were kind of born in, they say, a minute apart.
Okay.
And so they would have the exact same chart. And it's funny because when they are together, they're like one person, but they live in different areas of the country, and separately they're different. Their consciousness kind of developed in a different way. And then also a couple of other examples. When I was learning this, they said there was a man who was born at the exact same time as Charles Manson, and he became a criminal profiler. So kind of the same type of energies, but just expressed, in very different ways.
Yes. And depending on the houses we grow up in and the influences we've had along the way.
Exactly. Because that plays a huge role in it as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm a very different person now, having really started to interact with my birth chart, which I didn't do growing up. And I came from 4 siblings, and my parents, they were all very traditional, very kind of a lot of the same. And I was the different one, and so I didn't know why, and they didn't know why, but it makes a lot of sense now that I know.
Yeah, this. It does. Yeah. It does. That makes me think of that makes me think of family lineage. And sometimes when we have a sense that there are, healers and intuitives within families that are just, that's the way they're being expressed more within that family. Do you see that? I hear people ask a lot, like, oh, was your grandmother like that? Or so do you see kind of those qualities coming down through families too? I know that's sort of an aside question, but just one that's on my mind.
Yeah, no, I do. And I really have seen that through the family constellation work that I'm coming into. But it's so fascinating to do family charts, because oftentimes you can see there's a theme here.
Okay.
Between the charts. So there's a lot of differences, but perhaps the first time I started really looking at all of this was through the lens of a family that they each had strong Pluto. And the energy of Pluto is actually my favorite, but it's all about empowerment, transformation, but it can also, it can be about where we get into contests of wills and power struggles and all of that. And so at this family that was each kind of at times feeling powerless and at times really being called to step into their empowerment. And that was the common theme. And that was kind of what connected that family. So
Oh, wow.
it's really interesting when you see the pattern repeating.
That's very interesting.
Ways.
Yeah, that's great insight. I actually had a friend ask me when I said I was interviewing you today. She asked about Pluto specifically because she's heard about it within, I don't know, seeing it on maybe social media or just hearing it, that Pluto has something special going on right now. I don't know. She's like, because those are the things I don't understand when they say like, oh, it's rounding the earth, for the first time. And so, yeah.
Yeah, there is a lot going on with Pluto in this country specifically because Pluto has roughly a 248-year cycle to go from in its orbit through all of the different astrological signs to get back to where it came from. Like you may have heard of a Saturn return. That's usually when 28 to 30.
Okay.
That's when Saturn comes to be at the exact degree and minute it was at the time of your birth.
Okay.
So Pluto will never go through an individual's chart in one lifetime.
Oh, I see.
Because it takes too long. So it's always impactful if it goes through your sun or your moon. That's very impactful because this is calling you to really play big in the world, step into your empowerment, transform, sometimes go through dark night of the soul energy. But the United States is about to go through its Pluto return.
Okay.
And so if you think about that through the lens of like everything that's going on politically and culturally at this time, and this is the first time for this country, we're relatively a young country. So we are going through that. And the other thing is it's changing signs. So it's coming out of Capricorn and going into Aquarius.
And I think I've heard about that. Would that be even starting a year ago or so that I started hearing about Aquarius, maybe in the last couple of years?
Well, you may have been hearing about the age of Aquarius.
I think
which
so.
Is, yeah. So that is through, there are astrological ages that are roughly 2,500 years. And we're coming out of Pisces and we're going into the age of Aquarius. All right. And so, and it's been an interesting transition. What I have, I used to get all these questions about love. When am I going to find my partner? When am I going to get married? And I've had those questions myself, So that's a lot more about Pisces. It's like about merging with somebody, partnering, unconditional love, all of that. And going into Aquarius, now the number one question I get is, what is my life purpose? What am I meant to be doing? And I find that people, and you might find this in the people that you interview, they are mixing and matching modalities together in beautiful ways and coming up with something so unique that it's to me, it's like this wonderful community of healers because we're all kind of doing it a little bit differently and we all have something to add to what everyone else is doing. So
yeah, I thank you for pointing that out because I absolutely do see that. I'm close with a lot of the coaches whom I've trained with, and there'll be teachers that come into your orbit. It sounds like you've been this way for a while, but they'll come in and then just adding to it or listening to another teacher, understanding it in a new way has been really special for me because I will think I've got it down and then someone says it a different way. I'm like, oh, it's so beautiful. And I've been thinking of that word alchemy a lot lately because that's what I see, that people are alchemizing what they're learning and then pairing it with their own lived experiences. And I think you would say ancestral information or patterning, and making it their own. And that's why it's such a beautiful time to be an entrepreneur because I feel like everything's sort of fair game.
Yeah, absolutely. And because I think also we're going into hopefully more cooperative energy versus competitive, because nature is cooperative and we hear all these people talking about we're coming into, new consciousness, a new earth, like Eckhart Tolle says, and I really, and I actually see that a lot through the consciousness of the kids that are coming to
Yes.
earth at this point. And it's just makes me very optimistic for our future
Mm-hmm.
when I interact with them, because it's,
Yeah.
yeah, they have such gifts to bring, and they are more cooperative in nature for the most part.
Yes.
They
Yeah.
don't, we kind of want to get out of the rat race we've all
Mm-hmm.
been trained to do.
I agree. I was having a conversation with this woman, Terry Potter, and she'll be on the podcast soon. And we were talking a lot. It was all about the kids, but
Mm,
that they have this way also of being in acceptance of one another. And we still see things,
yes.
in schools, where people might not be feeling comfortable with themselves, and there's maybe bullying and things like that, for sure. However, all these marginalized populations are coming, it feels like, towards a collective. And to really be in that energy, if we can be in the conversations that allow us to see the energy ourselves and then hold for one another and hold it for our
Yeah.
kids, that's powerful. And I think when we spoke just last week when we first met, is the idea, I don't know if you called it them crystal children or rainbow children. Can you kind of educate
Mm-hmm.
a little bit on that and some of the language that's used around that, and just a
Yeah.
little bit more about these kids?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I first encountered it through my son, who
Mm-hmm.
would it. So I, tried to, I have two children, a daughter and a son, and I tried to control the birth of my daughter. That didn't work out. And then my son wouldn't come out. And then I was freaking out running charts and like, so I was learning past life regression at the time with an intuitive woman. And I called her up and I said, I have to pick his birthday and I can't, like, it's either March 13th or March 17th. I don't know what to do. And she just like tuned out for a minute. And she said, he's telling me he doesn't care, but he says he's a crystal child. And I don't know what that means, but Doreen Virtue wrote a book on it. Why don't you go explore that? And so I was like, crystal, so I did. And that led me to, the indigo, which I think that was the first, to me, I guess it was based on how the auras were viewed. And the indigo children, which I believe started coming in maybe in the 80s,
Okay.
is what I think they,
Mm-hmm.
I have a book called Are You an Indigo Adult? And I think I am, but I didn't have the courage, but I haven't. My daughter is like fierce, right? And you're going to just pay attention to her and you're going to respect her. And she's got this fierce energy. My son is like all about love and, not that she isn't, but, like I
Yes.
saw like a different type of consciousness come in. It was so interesting. And then she said he has stars above his head, and there are star children, there are rainbow children. And I think it's based on just the energy and the aura that they represent.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think they are just coming in ready to unfold their gifts much earlier. And if we attune to who they are and let them unfold, I kind of get out of I always looked at them as like, I just going to support them and get out of their way, because they need a lot of boundaries. I shouldn't say, you have to do the boundaries and consciously parent. It does take a lot of work and time. But having found astrology, I felt pretty comforted. I was like, I think I've been doing this, but because I learned astrology, I think I would have been very unconscious without that. But then also reading about that book on crystal children, it made a lot of sense. And star kids usually have bigger heads. Well, probably I did have a C-section because he couldn't come out because he has a big head, and I'm like, this is like really there's something to it. Not to label them or pigeonhole them, but just to understand their energy more.
Yes. And to be open to what we're seeing and experiencing, because I think how you're talking about astrologically, this the time of Aquarius, are you calling it age of Aquarius or just Aquarius?
Well,
okay.
I would call it the age of Aquarius,
okay,
because it is based on the astrological sign, based on the the tilt of the earth on its axis and
Yeah.
the precession of the
Okay.
equinoxes and all of that. Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to use the right language. And so a couple things are coming to mind, and that is around, for the listeners, is because there, of course, there's the children coming in and the times that
Yeah.
they're meeting in the age of Aquarius. But I love this
Mm-hmm.
idea that we're putting out there about, what can adults sort of be on the lookout for if we're moving from Pisces to Aquarius and things are changing. it
Mm-hmm.
it seems like there might be almost like more openings for that purpose that's coming through, or I don't know what comes to mind around that.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
Aquarius energy is all about being an individual marching to the beat of your own
Hmm.
drummer. It
Hmm.
desires freedom. It's very forward thinking, innovative. And so they're, I think, trying to show us how, like, a vision of how things could
Hmm.
be. And if we listen to and just like let their gifts unfold,
Yeah.
because part of it is that I think of the age of Aquarius this way. It's like we all have our own unique instrument to play in the collective orchestra of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
the more that we know each ourselves as guides to these kids, as more that we attune to who they are and let them unfold.
Mm-hmm.
Because Aquarius is also about the collective. It's about causes. It's about groups.
Mm-hmm.
So the joke about the person strong Aquarius is that they're on their way to a Greenpeace meeting and they see someone dying on the side of the road and they think to themselves, should I save this person or should I save the world? This person, the world. And the Aquarius is like, I got to save the world. So they leave the person and they go save the world. Because so if you think about, it gives me hope for
Mm-hmm.
maybe we can solve some of these larger issues like, climate change. Maybe there are innovative
Yeah.
methods and maybe
Mm-hmm.
we can save ourselves. It might not be too late because they're going to be forward thinking. They see something we don't see.
Yes. Yeah. Everything you're saying is perfect. I am thinking about when you're talking about that collective, because maybe in Pisces more, I'm think of, like in the 80s and 90s when that individualistic, I feel like some of that energy that people that gain speed and maybe was represented in our culture in a toxic form of it, of
Mm-hmm.
individuality, that's shifting and transforming. So this version feels the individual as part of the collective. And it also feels very
Mm-hmm.
trusting. It feels like it's the essence of it feels safer. It feels like we're being called to be ourselves and allow
Mm-hmm.
ourselves to be held within the collective without
Yes.
coming from a place of fear.
Yeah. 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 Because Pisces, I think all of the signs have operate on a spectrum. They all have very positive sides to them, but they do have their shadow sides, as everything
Okay.
does in
Mm-hmm.
energy, right? So the shadow side of Pisces is escapism, addictions, checking
Mm-hmm.
out, thinking codependency. And so, merging all into that one. And it also can be a little bit of, well, it's interesting. There's a lot of shifts, I think, in world religions going on too.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
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 And maybe people not depending so much, having faith and spirituality, but not depending so much on the institution. So I think, you know, that's what they say part of the Indigo mission is to kind of break down the structures that aren't working in the educational, political, judicial,
Mm-hmm.
all the
Mm-hmm.
major institutions and systems. They're like, this isn't working anymore. We have to bust it open and
Right.
bring in new energy to it. So,
Yeah. And it feels like asking, for the things that be that still remain, is just being
mhm.
curious about, how is this working now as we're moving into a new time. It dovetails really nicely into talk that I just did with, she's a local woman, Susan Lucci, and I think her podcast will be before this one. And she is all about the collective and purpose work. And she's grown, not, I think intentionally, but it's grown from this microcosm to like this big macrocosm on a world stage in terms of, and meeting with groups and entities who are willing and curious to begin a new conversation. So I like how this is all sort of synchronizing across the guests that I'm choosing for this particular period of time. And astrologically, that probably makes sense too.
It does. Yeah, because it's an important time when you're shifting, and you don't want to throw out all the great things about the other age. It's just you want to keep the great, and that's where, with these forward thinking, it's good to mix that with the conscious adults who can help them to see, just don't throw it all out, but integrate it and take what was working and make it better. Yeah.
So I'm thinking about some of your back to the individual work you do. And I think when I was kind of looking at your website, I was reading about family star maps. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So essentially the star map is just another name for the astrological birth chart. And so that's the birth chart that's constructed for that moment of birth in time and space. And so it's about kind of diving into your individual birth chart or star map, and then also working with, for example, mothers to understand their children, because to me, it's the closest thing you're going to get to an owner's manual for yourself. And if there'd be one thing that I would say is, I wish when you left the hospital, when a new mom left the hospital, they received a copy of their child's birth chart and the card of the nearest astrologer.
Oh my gosh.
And so go see, or explore it on your own, but, understand who you're interacting with, because that was,
that would be huge.
That would be so huge, because, it's overwhelming, and it is overwhelming. And then when you have another one, you're like, well, this one's so different, which is a part of why Dr. Shefali's work made so much sense, right? And it's just like they all have their own signature, and it's not just because they're helping you to grow, but how can we best support them to grow? And what are the themes in our family, and what things aren't working, and what things do we need to shift? And so, so that's what I call it's just it's interesting, because I think astrology has a lot of misconceptions. So at one point I called it an energy blueprint. A star map is another way of just kind of shifting. I think it's becoming the kids that I talk to, they know their charts, through like apps, right? So they know their apps, and they know how they relate to each other. So I feel like it's because astrology is ruled by Aquarius. Okay. So astrology has a great, hopefully we'll have a resurgence in this age.
I think it's really, really hugely, infinitely possible, because even the topics that we're just bringing forth, I know there are a lot of podcasts that have touched upon these things, of course, but to be able to weave together, whether it's, it can start with, what we know as traditional, but it's just, I think they all complement each other so beautifully. And those kind of the deep needs that are going on, and what are they calling for? And I can see, like, it would be so beneficial whenever I've done readings with our mutual friend Valerie Wood, who was on the podcast. I always ask about my children. I think that as mothers, as parents, we're really curious about, tell me more about them, like what makes them run, what inspires them, you could see that hugely beneficial in the guidance of our children and our support of them.
I agree. And I think it's been so interesting, and you probably have seen this too, is that when you make a shift in your life in a positive way as a mother, then you will see in the outer expression of your children a positive shift in them. And it just gives you such awe of like how things flow down the bloodline. Both ways. I think it helps our ancestors, and I think it helps our descendants when we work on just this, what we have control of in ourselves.
Yeah. To that point of healing even those who have gone before us. I've heard before, because a lot of what I learn and then integrate, I think before that embodiment, it's like I take it in, right? Even today's conversation. But the idea that the work we're doing now can heal the generations before us is the healing. I had heard when I talked to an intuitive before that sometimes people don't heal everything that is possible to heal in their current lifetime. So when I think that was said, maybe not about my mom, but anyway, that when they go on, even on the other side, they are still healing through us. Is that kind of, are those two concepts kind of, does that make sense? Related?
Yeah. And that's really how I, with a business coach, she helped me come up with the name of my company, Future Echo, because the echoes, I think, go backward and they go forward. And so, and in the work of the family constellation, oftentimes we're calling on the ancestors because there are these issues that run through family lines. We all have them, and they're always looking for wholeness and resolution. And when it doesn't get solved in, say, one lifetime through the mother, then there may be one of her children that come in with an entanglement from the past, entangled with this issue because the issue wants to be cleared. And so sometimes we have these issues that are really hard to clear because they didn't start with us and they don't really belong to us. But to honor the family system and to stay connected to it, we are playing the entanglements out in our lives. And so that's why there are so many different modalities that I think can help to provide. I always think of it as like pieces of a puzzle that you're trying to solve, because we're all just trying to get more into wholeness. And and I think, from a consciousness standpoint, some people's consciousness get to a certain point and they can't go any further, and that's fine. That's just, and then they just maybe need to rest, and maybe they'll come back, believe in multiple lives. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. It does. And then I'm thinking about, just your mention too of that healing work, but also the family constellations. And because I think family constellations as a concept, I started hearing about it probably through our mutual friends just in the last couple of years. And we had talked about it, but I watched the beautiful show Another Self on Netflix about where they sort of highlighted the process of family constellations. So I was like, oh, and a friend took part in it recently. But I feel like, do the family constellations work when you can see family patterns over generations, however they're appearing, instead of being caught up, because so much like on the physical human form, we can be caught up in what seems like the drama of what's going on. And I feel like this kind of work would help people possibly bring more compassion to the generations and compassion to what's occurred even in their own lifetime.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it does, because I think the compassion really flows from the awareness. And the more aware that we are through many different modalities, then, and also the compassion comes from things being revealed. Because oftentimes what trips us up is what is unknown. And even within ourselves. So the different modalities that help you understand yourself better reveal, and then you can have compassion as you're shifting into and trying to heal that. And then the family patterns, you understand that this is a pattern passed down through generations. And it wasn't like somebody was trying to do something to you. It's like they were struggling with their own issues, and they did the best that they could. at the time. And it does.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's such a beautiful concept right there. And I'm thinking, do sometimes people too, I think this was me at one point, when you go to someone like yourself, an astrologer or a healer or a Reiki person, and you might get some information back and you love it. You love it. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. But maybe there's part of you that says this isn't real, or this isn't, like, this is fake, or it's not, because I think we have
I
those
do know.
because we, yeah. So what
I
can you
know
say about that?
Well,
Yeah.
I know from my personal experience.
Mhm.
So just a brief aside, I had broken up with somebody, and of course I wanted to get married and I wanted to have kids, and I'm taking astrology. I was going to go to my teacher. She's going to give me a date time, going to tell me when this is going to just magically happen. Right. And she said, hold on, let's look at your relationship issues. And I literally remember going, I don't have any relationship issues. What are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
So she proceeded over the next hour to tell me my
Mm-hmm.
issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought she was crazy. I thought, I'm
Wow.
learning from a crazy woman. This is not me. But by the end of that night, I went home and I was like, this is so you. It was like that mirror being held up. And I was like, and I just sat, I literally sat for a year with this. And I don't even know how I shifted it, but I dated one other person for like one time. And then the next person I attracted was the man I'm still married to. And so I had to make a consciousness shift. And I didn't know at the time, I didn't even know I needed to do it. So I have had that experience of thinking, this isn't accurate. What are you talking about? But if you really are honest and sit with it, sometimes it bubbles up to the surface of like,
yes,
that makes sense. And it's a lot of information in a session, because I always felt this way with mine. It was like, it's a lot to take in. I always record it for people, because I'm going to, usually I always ask, like, what are your life questions? Like, what are you struggling with? And then, but there's usually, I can tell why they're coming to me, because, maybe Saturn is really, impacting their chart, or Pluto. I like to work with the slower moving planets.
Okay.
In this session, because that's where we can dig into making the conscious shifts that they want. But then I've also started doing some new and full moon ceremonies with my Qigong teacher, where we're working more intently with the lunar cycle, because you get an opportunity to work with that once a month. And there are specific steps that you can take. And the moon is so beautiful because you can see it, and, you can track its phases, and there are different actions to take in a month. So it's a lot about, I think these energies are just always calling on us to wake up a little bit more to who we are.
Yeah, I'm soaking in just everything you shared today. And I feel like when you're talking about the moon ceremony, that it feels like I like the pace of these conversations, because they're perfect, and they kind of, to me, are a little bit slower, even though it's a lot of information. But when I can visualize the moon, the full moon, let's say, and just like when I do that, it feels like there's a part of me that's, I think, my mind, that makes understanding it hard. But if I really more feel into it, then it feels like it's part of me. And does astrology have that mirror to people's kind of, as we sort of wrap up here today? Is there a mirror from our inside to what's guiding us and all of these concepts on the outside?
Yeah, I absolutely. And the moon is a great example. I mean, the sun too, because of course you see the sun, and that's the core of who you are. But the moon is where it's our feeling nature to begin with. And so sometimes just like being in awe and just going out and looking at that moon is just like unbelievable. And now we have apps too, where we can, we can't see, sometimes we can see Venus like with our naked eye, or Jupiter or Mars, and then we can track it in the sky, and just to go out and just look at it and be in awe of that and take it in.
Yes.
And understand that the energy, it's so weird, because I don't know how it works. I just know that it works, but
Yeah.
all based on that time. You give me the right time, and people are like, I can't believe you described me. I'm like, well, then we have an accurate birth time, because
Right.
it works. There are characteristics assigned. I don't know how it works. I just know that it works. But if you
Yeah.
give me a different birth time, you're going to think I'm crazy, because that's different than. So I've had that experience too. And then they'll come back and go, oh, my birth time was off. And I'm like, well, that's a whole different chart,
Okay.
So
yeah.
So it's part science and part art form, in a sense, the science is like that, where they were at that moment. And then the art form is just interpreting it for people.
So good. So good. I love it all. I'm intrigued, and I definitely want to explore more for myself. For our listeners, Lisa, where can they find you? What do you work one-on-one? Do you do workshops, and where can they find you?
Yeah, so I do work one-on-one, and I have a home office in Palatine, but I'm in a couple of different locations throughout Chicago land area. And then I do Zoom, I do some workshops, I do some, like, we're starting to do the new and full moon ceremonies, which are awesome. I partner with other practitioners sometimes because it pairs so well with different things. So, sorry, where can they find me? So Lisa at futureecho.org. Okay. And then futureecho.org is my website, and they can call me at 847-917-5473.
Okay, perfect. And I'll put it all in the show notes, but I want to say a big thank you for being here today. It was such an amazing conversation, and I know it's going to continue.
Yes. Well, we have to do your chart.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yes. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mystical Sisterhood. To learn more about my one-on-one coaching programs or join the Mystical Sisterhood membership, visit MaureenSpielman.com or mysticalsisterhood.com. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next episode.